All over the world, protest movements are being prohibited by new draconian legislation. We ask, more specifically, I ask, is COVID being used to usher in a police authoritarian state in which the voices of dissenters are silenced?
Inspired by the recent violence at some protests nationwide, Governor DeSantis announced the Combating Violence, Disorder, and Looting and Law Enforcement Protection Act.
If you are involved in a violent or disorderly assembly, you're going to jail.
World's starting to look a bit like RoboCop, isn't it? Sort of everything looks a bit mad and vivid and dystopic and terrifying. So since that thing that happened at the Capitol on January the 6th, at least 9 states have introduced 14 anti-protest bills. The bills, which vary state by state, contain an array of provisions that serve to criminalise participation in disruptive protests. We're granting extraordinary powers to the state, incredible powers to corporations, and it seems to me less and less choice for individuals even to have free discussions.
Among many things, Senate Bill 211 expands when police can use, quote, defensive force and requires someone arrested during a riot to be held for at least 48 hours.
Nebraska are seeking to redefine disruptive protests, in this case upping the penalty for riots to include any disturbance in a public place involving at least 3 people. At least for the Kaiser Chiefs, their predictions will be a lot more likely to ring true. I predict a riot? Well, every time there's 3 people arguing, there is one.
Opponents of the bill say there are more important issues for lawmakers to tackle.
In Mississippi and Indiana, they would also punish anyone aiding a riot. Aiding a riot. If a riot's just 3 people, you could sort of aid it by going, oh, this way, please. Prosecutors will be able to bring felony charges against anyone who was part of a riot, even if they didn't personally cause it. I didn't personally cause it. Doesn't matter.
The right to peaceful protest, to demonstrate one's views, to be heard, potentially under threat in proposed legislation containing a range of new powers for the police.
So what's going on then? It seems like there is a lot of unrest because we're in an unprecedented time of fragmentation in this new age of populism and peculiar cultural forms of puritanism that are new and emergent, an inability to engage in reasonable public discourse, I would say somewhat exacerbated by the kind of spaces where you're consuming this content, online forums where conversation becomes a lot more incendiary, condemnatory and less tolerant of other people's views as we experience opinions that we might not otherwise have experienced rather, while simultaneously operating in sort of bubbles, identikit bubbles where you assume everyone in the world is like you. Of course, really what we need to create is sort of freedom and autonomy for people to live and express themselves however they want to, as long as they're not harming other people. These seem like pretty basic principles, but with this new state legislation, both in the UK and in America, what we're sort of creating is stasis and an inability to even address that stasis.
A prohibition on camping has been shortened to 24 hours after a riot.
But if camping, though, is part of a riot, we're all in trouble. Well, that just means you can't put a tent up like in a street, innit? You can't sort of build permanent encampments such as the Occupy movement. I guess what they fear is the new ability to organise that social media to a degree grants, even if those protests are unlikely to lead to meaningful change because, as has been pointed out, they often don't have a cohesive idea to head towards. That's really what needs to be evolved. I completely acknowledge that. But if you can't protest peacefully, and if the term peacefully is a kind of mobile one that can be defined by those that are imposing the legislation and regulation, then what you consider to be peaceful might not be peaceful. I mean, some of them, you can't even make a noise. So you've got a protest like, what do we want? Equality. When do we want it? Pardon?
New proposal in Kentucky would make it a crime to insult a police officer.
You bloody pig. You're under arrest for hurting my feelings.
It would create a misdemeanor crime for anyone who accosts, insults, taunts, or challenges a law enforcement officer with offensive or derisive words, or by gestures or other physical contact.
Gestures. Mamma mia!
Would have a direct tendency to provoke a violent response from a perspective of a reasonable and prudent person.
You can't start deciding who a reasonable and prudent person is. Like when there's elections where some people think Donald Trump's like the Messiah and other people hate him, where some people think Joe Biden is the new father of America, reaching out his arms of light round that pond thing to give the whole of America a cuddle, and other people think he's a demented senile old nitwit.
Anyone convicted could face a fine of $250 and be disqualified from public assistance benefits for 3 months.
Oh, get them in the benefits, because who is it that's going to be protesting? Poor people that need benefits. Oh, that's rough, man. That's a low down move there.
It's a cornerstone of our democracy that people should have the ability to verbally challenge police action, even if it's offensive, even if it uses words that people don't like.
Daniel Squadron, who's president of Future Now and has a very good surname, says, make no mistake, these bills were teed up long ago to criminalise peaceful protests, stifle speech and obscure the clear distinction between First Amendment rights and a violent insurrection. Meanwhile, in the UK, Kenan Malik in The Observer says COVID has become an excuse for the executive to bypass Parliament to push through rules on the fly after a nod from the minister with little transparency or scrutiny. So wherever you are in the world and wherever you are politically, in fact, it's necessary, isn't it, as a philosophical exercise to encourage and allow people you disagree with to protest your views, to countenance and disagree with your views. It's the mark of a civil society. And without that, I suppose what we're saying is that we don't want a civil society. You want draconian laws that support your personal perspective, but that's not how democracy works. And we've not been living in anything resembling a real democracy anyway, sort of more like a kind of some sort of elitist feudal system where the democratic process is merely a veil. But now, even in a kind of cultural and social space, there is no ability to communicate. You're seeing this across cultural life, and now we are seeing legislation for it. It's, for me, a further indication that we can no longer handle the antiquated models of nations, these great sort of social behemoths comprising millions and millions of people, as more and more diversity of opinion and culture, for me, highlight the necessity that for true democracy, we have to live in smaller, decentralized, tribalized societies.
We need to be looking at why people are protesting in the first place and addressing the root causes.
I agree with that person, and I also think that the state, by concentrating their efforts on prohibiting the right to protest, almost forces it online for further fracturing and fragmentation where people can't have face-to-face contact. Dia Khan, who came on our podcast Under the Skin a while ago, talked about how she, as a Muslim woman, spends time with white supremacists face-to-face so that they experience the reality of the people that they reckon they hate. I think this cuts both ways. The more that we see each other as human beings, the more that we see that ultimately, here we are on this little rock in infinite space, a flash of consciousness and life, alive for a brief time. We're the same. We're the same. If you were plucked from your various camps and placed on a spaceship, would you go, well, I'm not going to sit next to this wanker on the spaceship. He voted for Donald Trump. Well, we're on Mars now. We better get our shit together. No way. I'm going to hang with the Martians. We're all basically the same as one another, and we have to find ways of creating, yes, true equality, true democracy, without legislation to prohibit our ability to communicate and without the loss of civility and basic love and acceptance and trust of one another.
Overall, the bill has many elements of it which are quite authoritarian. They defer to senior police officers on judgments as to whether something can be considered criminal, and that particularly sits in the part of the bill which deals with protest. So if protests are considered to be causing serious annoyance.
This protest is annoying me. Nick 'em.
Whilst this bill might be held up as containing measures to address violence against women and girls, in reality it lays out measures which undermine our right to hold power to account.
That's a crafty move, isn't it? To protect women and girls, we're not going to let anyone, including women and girls, protest about, for example, the mistreatment of women and girls. Oh, thanks for that.
And I think we can see how important it is to be able to hold power to account and to be able to scrutinise and contain the use of state power.
In a way, you could argue that the role of government is to create an environment where free communication, free civil protest is allowed, peaceful protest is permitted, where people are allowed to have disagreements. And in increasing these measures, in changing these laws, I think it creates more tension between people, more agitation. And I feel that the unique pandemic situation that we find ourselves in is being used to mobilise and release new powers that wouldn't be tolerated or accepted under new conditions. If you agree with me and if you've enjoyed being part of this conversation, please like and subscribe to this video. Comment, because we read the comments and we will respond to them if we can. I always reply to as many as I can. And please also go over to russellbrand.com and join my ARC Nexus, Collective. It's a mailing list. Sign up to my mailing list so I can have direct communication with you in case this stuff ever goes belly up. Thank you.